The events of January 6, 2021 have been declared an insurgency, attempted overthrow of the government, and the greatest threat to democracy in history, according to Democrats and the liberal media. In fact, they tried to impeach President Donald Trump, accusing him of inciting the insurrection, and failed. Then they launched the largest FBI investigation in history to track down all the persons present at the Capitol that they could identify and prosecute them, but yet not a single person was ever charged with insurrection. All of the claims that Trump tried to overthrow the government and incited revolution are not only false, in fact, they are preposterous and hypocritical. After Donald Trump won the presidency in 2016, there was a massive liberal-sponsored attempt to breach the White House, and it was in fact a riot with property damage, yet there were no prosecutions. In Joseph Biden's America, justice only flows one way, like a river, and we will explain why. What was January 6th specifically? How did it happen? What new information have we learned as a result to challenge the previously held assertions? How involved was the deep state in those events? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, military veteran, historian, author, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. After the 2020 election on January 6, 2021, while congressional certification of the presidential election results took place in the United States Capitol, President Trump held a noon rally at the Ellipse near the Capitol in Washington, D.C. The liberal media made much of claiming that he called for the election result to be overturned and urged his supporters to take back our country by marching to the Capitol to show strength and fight like hell. Despite his speech where he stated that they should march peacefully and patriotically and basically remain law-abiding citizens, that part of his speech they always edited out when creating their skewed reports. Many of his supporters did march to the Capitol, where the media reported that, around 2:15 p.m., the mob broke into the building, disrupting certification and causing the evacuation of Congress. What the liberal media failed to relate to the public, as well as suppressed by the January 6th committee, was that hundreds of people were invited in by the Capitol Police, as seen on videos, and many were even escorted through the building. Some, like the famous QAnon shaman, Jacob Chansley, they were given a guided tour. The media claimed that during the event, Trump watched it and posted messages on Twitter without asking the rioters to disperse. That was another lie. Trump actually sent messages through his social media, including a video, such as Twitter, asking people to refrain from any violence, demonstrate peacefully, and then disperse. He even did a video message asking them to go home. In fact, according to Reuters, the FBI has found scant evidence that the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol was the result of an organized plot to overturn the presidential election result, according to 4 current and former law enforcement officials. The January 6th committee ignored the report. Dorsey, the liberal fraud who owned Twitter and was complicit in working with the government to suppress opposing voices during the election and during COVID, had lied to Congress under oath. He was like Facebook leader Mark Zuckerberg, as well as other social media platforms. Dorsey deleted all Trump-related tweets where he told the crowds to be peaceful and go home, allowing the Democrats to make these claims. But Trump still had them, proving they were sent. When Elon Musk bought Twitter, this was exposed. But the Democrats were not done spinning their version of events. As the media reported, and as stated by National Public Radio, according to the Department of Justice, more than 140 police officers were injured and 5 people died. In fact, the only death that day was unarmed U.S. Air Force veteran Ashley Babbitt, who was shot by Capitol Police. The only federal official death was Officer Brian Sicknick, who sadly died the next day, apparently of an unrelated medical condition, from an acute brainstem and cerebellar infarcts due to acute basilar artery thrombosis. 2 strokes at the base of the brainstem caused by an artery clot, according to the coroner's report. The media also falsely reported that he had been beaten with a fire extinguisher, although one had been thrown. His death the next day was not connected to the event, according to the medical examiner. Even Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez referred to the Capitol riot on January 6 as a terror attack, which she said resulted in almost 10 dead. Besides Babbitt and Stop the Steal protesters Kevin Greeson, 55 years of age, and Benjamin Phillips, 50, both dying of cardiovascular disease and the manners of death were deemed natural, there were no other deaths. What was the real story behind the so-called insurrection? A government overthrow that, for the first time in history, had no open display of firearms, pretty much a requirement to overthrow a government these days. My colleague, Bill Carrico, was one of the investigators looking into the various state elections, and he presents a report to Congress that was rather condemning, as he states. Getting back to Congress on January 6th, instead of those debates taking place back-to-back as I was expecting, the first 2-hour debate, which began with an objection filed for Arizona, was interrupted after an hour and 15 minutes. Had the 6-hour recess not occurred, the congressional record would have been filled with similar detailed information for 2 hours each that described election irregularities in Georgia, Michigan, and Nevada. That would have been followed by another 4 hours of debate for Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. What are the odds Speaker Pelosi would leave the House chambers while the first objection was being heard and be in front of a live video camera that captured the exact moment that she was notified the breach had occurred? Good thing she had her daughter, Alexandra, a documentary filmmaker, capture her mom's behavior in the face of the grave danger posed by the mob, some of whom were being escorted by Capitol Police. As it turned out, Adam Kinzinger had more firepower on his desk than all the citizens who entered the People's House combined. What isn't widely known is that out of the massive gathering of citizens that surrounded the Capitol on that fateful day, only 6 people were arrested on illegal firearms charges, and no one who entered the Capitol building was charged with carrying guns. Some carried pepper spray, pipe bombs, and Molotov cocktails. One person wielded a fire extinguisher. Tragically, the senseless murder of unarmed Ashley Babbitt was needed to change the narrative by painting a picture of a deadly insurrection, making historical references and amping up attacks on those challenging election results. For example, the first speaker in opposition to the Arizona objection after the long recess had a new ammunition to fill his 5 minutes. As you listen to his remarks, keep in mind that 3 years later, the FBI investigation, spawned by what happened during that long recess, turned into the largest in its history as they tracked down people to charge for this armed insurrection. The planners of the J6 long recess, as well as the media, knew that without an external event, the debates about objections could fill at least another full day, maybe 2, while orators in both chambers, serving as the voice of 100 million Americans, presented their best evidence. Did the protesters in fact have a valid reason to protest the election, given the information available at the time? Again, Bill Carrico states, the Republicans argued that all across the country, not just in swing states, government officials and judges changed state election laws in the same year as the election without legislative approval, and the last-minute changes that were made brought chaos and confusion. The bottom line is that those who usurped legislative power had broken the law and were subject to prosecution. How 8 hours of debates were silenced. Congressional rules stipulate that an objection raised must be in writing and sponsored by at least one member of both the House and Senate. Multiple senators who had agreed to sign the documents before the recess flipped their positions afterward, and 8 hours of debate on irregularities failed to make it into the congressional record. That explains why Devin Nunes saw jovial Democratic leaders high-fiving each other before the recess ended at 9:02 p.m. and the Arizona debate resumed. Therefore, I sat glued to C-SPAN, watching the proceedings. The media knew, but weren't sounding the alarm, with at least one exception. Bill Hemmer of Fox News summed it up this way while covering Trump's speech to those gathered on January 6th around the White House. He said, "In the halls of Congress 60 minutes from now, we're going to see a debate play out in Congress where well over 100 Republicans could speak. At least a dozen senators are going to speak on his behalf as well, and they're going to cast doubts on the U.S. election system. They're going to require and request the hope to get an election audit for the election system in the U.S. The support data I helped prepare for use by over 100 members of Congress prior to January 6 detailed voting anomalies in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, and New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. The aggregate of the evidence showed that the combined winning margin for these 7 states was 415,000 votes, and that 2,200,000 votes should be contested. Those in Congress who supported the rush to certify 2020 election results, despite the evidence, were not only wrong, they violated their oath of office. Such certifications were indefensible. That explains why an apparently or obviously planned interruption occurred about 90 minutes into a session where the dental surgeon turned congressman, Representative Brian Babbitt from Texas, planned to pose the questions below to Nancy Pelosi and all of his colleagues during normal business hours. This is from the congressional record from 1 a.m. the next morning. Madam Speaker, what do you have to lose by having a thorough investigation to determine the validity of these votes? Why not encourage an investigation to relieve the concerns of half the people in this country? If you are so convinced that Biden was elected legitimately, what do you have to fear? If there was no fraud, simply show us the proof, investigate it, validate it. This isn't about one candidate versus another. This is about upholding the principles that are indispensable to the existence of the democratic republic that we are so fortunate to call home. I have no doubt that there was widespread election fraud this past November, and I am not alone. I stand here today speaking for 75 million Americans whose voice was unconstitutionally silenced. After resuming the Arizona objection after 9 p.m. at night, the only other objection allowed was from Pennsylvania. The other 4 objections never materialized because there were no senators willing to sponsor them. After the insurrection, Republican Senators James Lankford of Oklahoma, Kelly Loeffler of Georgia, and Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee withdrew their support. Had they not done so, the debate may have continued into the light of the next day, but now that is a moot point. But what actually created the so-called invasion of the Capitol? What we now know was that an unknown number of federal agents were embedded into the crowd, some changing clothes and many dressed as Trump supporters who started to stir the crowd. When FBI Director Christopher Wray was pressed by media regarding this issue, he called the accusation preposterous. But during his testimony in the House of Representatives under oath, he would not confirm nor deny that any of his agents were undercover during the riot. He could have said none were involved, if that was in fact true. But the January 6th committee that later convened after the impeachment failed, which had no legal authority and even less credibility, began. It was not a legal proceeding as they did not allow opposing counsels or witnesses, but they did produce police officers and partisan witnesses who claimed to be victims. They even showed hours of footage showing a few people smashing windows. But they left out about 10,000 hours of cumulative footage, much of it showing hundreds of peaceful demonstrators being escorted into and through the Capitol by the police. Videos showing the police taking down barriers and inviting people into the building were strangely absent. They also never showed the video footage of the Capitol police officers who suddenly, without explanation, left their post at the same time just before Ashley Babbitt was shot. Police feeling under threat do not just walk away from their assigned positions. A major point of contention was the discussion of the D.C. National Guard not being present after Trump offered to place them on location. Major General William Walker, the commanding general of the D.C. National Guard, told the Post the Pentagon took that power away from him ahead of the Capitol riot, which meant he could not immediately deploy troops when the Capitol Police Chief called asking for help as rioters were about to reach the building. Walker stated that Lieutenant General Walter Piet, director of the Army Staff, and General Charles Flynn, brother of former President Donald Trump's White House National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, said it wouldn't look good to send National Guard troops to the Capitol. Piet and Flynn stated in their testimony that such a conversation regarding optics never happened. All military commanders normally have immediate response authority to protect property, life, and, in my case, federal functions, federal property and life, Walker told the Post. But in this instance, I did not have that authority. Instead, Walker needed approval from then Army Secretary Ryan McCarthy and then Acting Defense Secretary Christopher Miller before deploying troops. Asked how quickly Guardsmen could have arrived at the Capitol, which is 2 miles from the D.C. National Guard's headquarters, without the higher-level approval, Walker told the Post, "With all deliberate speed, they're right down the street." Pentagon officials, local D.C. authorities, and the Capitol Police have traded accusations about who is to blame for the Guard's slow response once rioters reached the Capitol. The Pentagon has said Capitol Police denied offers of Guard assistance in the days before the attack. Piet said that Speaker Kevin McCarthy asked how fast the 40-member Quick Reaction Force could respond to the Capitol. Piet recounted that Walker said that the force could be ready to move in 20 minutes. McCarthy directed Walker to prepare the force but wait to deploy from the D.C. Armory until he received approval from then-acting Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller. Piet said that Miller didn't approve the activation of the National Guard until just after 3 p.m. Eastern Time, a decision that didn't get relayed to Walker until just after 5 p.m. Eastern Time. A Pentagon timeline of events says it took roughly an hour and a half to approve the Guard's deployment on January 6 after requests were made by Capitol Police and D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, a Democrat, but only long after the events unfolded. The confusion between departments is astounding. The former chief of U.S. Capitol Police, Stephen Sund, stated that security officials at the House and Senate rebuffed his early request to call in the National Guard ahead of a demonstration in support of President Trump that turned into a deadly attack on Congress. Sund contradicted the claims made by those officials, including his superiors, who had stated previously that the National Guard and other additional security support could have been provided, but no one at the Capitol requested it. Sund told the Washington Post that House Sergeant-at-Arms Paul Irving was concerned with the optics of declaring an emergency ahead of the protest and rejected a National Guard presence. He says Senate Sergeant-at-Arms Michael Stenger recommended that he informally request the Guard to be ready in case it was needed to maintain security. In the aftermath, Sund, Irving, and Stenger all resigned. Even D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser did not want the optics, but finally agreed 3 hours after it began. It is clear that the Democrats and the weaponized federal agencies, the same ones who went after Trump and other Republicans by creating false charges and weak impeachments, were determined to stage an event that would hopefully turn public opinion against Trump and his supporters. Citing Reuters, Trump made an incendiary speech at a nearby rally shortly before the riot, repeating false claims that the 2020 election was stolen and urging supporters to march on the Capitol to pressure lawmakers to reject Biden's victory. In public comments last month to the Democratic-led congressional committee formed to investigate the violence, police officers injured in the mayhem urged lawmakers to determine whether Trump helped instigate it. Some Democrats have said they want him to testify. But the FBI has so far found no evidence that he or people directly around him were involved in organizing the violence, according to the 4 current and former law enforcement officials. As we now know, the election was stolen, it was fraudulent. Democrats and their liberal rhino conspirators, along with judges and prosecutors, refused to investigate the allegations. The people knew, they were angry, and they responded. January 6th should have never unfolded the way it did. But it was not an organized usurpation of the federal government by Trump supporters. In fact, it caused less damage and had less long-term and fatal results than the 2020 Black Lives Matter and Antifa riots known as the Summer of Love that ravaged cities across the nation, costing $2 billion or more in damage, and people died. Thanks for watching today's episode of Forgotten History. If you like this episode, please consider becoming a channel member or joining our Patreon page. This would help us offset the ever-increasing cost of production. As always, please like, share, and comment. And if you have any show ideas, please contact us, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Until next time.